Hello, dear gardeners, and welcome to Buckeye Bloomstead. Now, just like in baking, when it comes to gardening, there's a recipe for everything. But sometimes, those old wives' tales and gardening myths can lead us astray. You know, like adding a pinch of salt to your cake batter to make it sweeter. It simply isn't true. And in the garden, believing those myths can be just as troublesome. They might not ruin your plants entirely, but they can certainly hinder their growth and your gardening success. So, on Buckeye Bloomstead today, we're separating fact from fiction. We're going to debunk those common gardening myths that have been passed down through generations. We'll dig deep, unearth the truth, and hopefully sprout some new knowledge along the way. Get ready to have your gardening gloves on, because we're about to get our hands dirty with some truth. Now, let's start with a myth we've likely all encountered at some point: adding eggshells to your compost to reduce acidity. It sounds plausible, doesn't it? After all, eggshells are practically pure calcium, and calcium is known to neutralize acidity. Many gardeners believe that tossing their breakfast leftovers into the compost bin will work wonders on their soil's pH. And while it's true that eggshells contain calcium carbonate, which can have a liming effect, it's not quite as straightforward as it seems. You see, it takes time for those eggshells to break down in the compost. And I do mean a long time. We're talking years, not weeks or months. Imagine those poor eggshells sitting in your compost heap, slowly decomposing year after year. By the time they've released enough calcium to make a noticeable difference in your soil's acidity, you could have baked dozens of batches of perfectly risen cakes. Now, I'm not suggesting you toss out those eggshells. They still have a place in your compost bin, even if their acidity-busting powers are a bit, shall we say, slow-acting. Think of them as a slow-release fertilizer, gradually adding valuable nutrients to your compost over time. Eggshells are a fantastic source of calcium, which is essential for strong cell walls in plants. Just like we need calcium for strong bones, our green friends need it for sturdy stems and healthy growth. And here's a little tip: if you want to speed up the decomposition process by leaps and bounds. To prepare eggshells for better nutrient absorption in your garden, start by thoroughly rinsing the shells to remove any residual egg whites. Afterward, spread them out on a baking sheet and place them in the oven at a low temperature, around 200 degrees Fahrenheit, 93 degrees Celsius, for about 10 to 15 minutes to dry them completely. Once dried, the shells will be brittle and easy to crush. You can either break them into smaller pieces or grind them into a semi-powder or fine powder using a mortar and pestle, rolling pin, blender, or food processor. This process significantly speeds up the decomposition time, allowing plants to absorb the calcium and other beneficial nutrients more efficiently compared to simply crushing or tossing whole shells into the garden, which could take years to break down naturally. But the benefits of eggshells don't stop there. Oh no, my dears, these little wonders have even more to offer your garden. Did you know that if you leave the eggshells crushed and not powdered, eggshells can act as a natural deterrent for pesky slugs and snails? Those sharp edges can be quite uncomfortable for those slimy creatures to crawl over, making your precious seedlings less appealing. It's like creating a tiny, prickly fence around your plants. So, while eggshells might not be the instant acidity fix some gardeners believe them to be, they're still a valuable addition to your composting arsenal. And who knows? While you're waiting for those shells to break down, you might just perfect your sponge cake recipe. Let's debunk a popular myth. Watering plants in the sunshine will scorch their leaves. It's like the old saying about not swimming after eating. It sounds logical, but it's not true. Many believe water droplets act like magnifying glasses, burning leaves. But your plants won't combust from midday watering. Water doesn't magnify the sun's rays enough to cause damage. Droplets evaporate too quickly to create heat buildup. Water is more likely to cool plants than heat them up. While watering in the sunshine won't scorch your plants, it's often recommended to water early in the morning or later in the evening. The reason is evaporation. At peak sun, water droplets disappear before reaching the roots. Watering during cooler parts of the day helps water soak into the soil. It's all about maximizing efficiency. The most important thing is to ensure your plants are well hydrated, regardless of the time of day. If you notice your plants wilting slightly in the afternoon sun, don't hesitate to give them a refreshing drink. A little bit of water never hurt anyone, plant or human. Just remember to water deeply and evenly to encourage those roots to grow nice and strong. And if you're really concerned about scorching, you can always water the base of your plants directly, avoiding the leaves altogether. So, put aside those fears of sun-scorched leaves and water your plants whenever they need it. After all, a happy plant is a thirsty plant, just like a happy baker needs a cup of tea and a biscuit after a long day in the kitchen. Now, this next myth always reminds me of a time I tried to rescue a batch of wilting cupcakes. I thought, a bit of extra sugar will perk them right up. Well, let's just say it didn't quite go to plan. You see, just like my cupcakes, plants have their own way of making and using sugar. They're quite clever, those leaves, using sunlight to create energy through photosynthesis. It's their own special recipe, you see. So, what does a wilting plant really need? Good old-fashioned H2O. Water is the elixir of life, for plants and for us bakers. It's what plumps them up, keeps them hydrated, and helps them thrive. Think of a wilting plant like a dried-out sponge. It needs a good soaking to regain its structure and bounce back to life. And just like you wouldn't add sugar to your sponge cake after it's baked, you shouldn't add it to your plant's water. The best way to know what your plants need is to simply observe them. Are the leaves drooping? The soil dry to the touch? These are telltale signs that your plants are thirsty, and just like we enjoy a refreshing drink on a warm day, so do our plants. So don't be shy about giving them a good watering when they need it. But remember, moderation is key. Now, this next myth always makes me chuckle a bit. You know how some folks like to chat away to their plants, convinced it helps them grow? It's a sweet thought, isn't it? Like having a nice chat with your plants over a cup of coffee or tea. Some say it's the vibrations from our voices that do the trick, but I'm not so sure about that. Plants are clever things, but I'm not convinced they're quite ready to start gossiping about the neighbours just yet. Now, I'm not saying you should start reciting Shakespeare to your sunflowers. They probably wouldn't understand a word of it. But there have been some rather interesting studies about the effects of sound on plants. It seems they might be more sensitive to vibrations than we once thought. Some research suggests that certain sounds, like classical music or even the gentle hum of a beehive, might actually stimulate plant growth. It's all very fascinating, isn't it? Like I always say, there's always something new to learn in the garden. So, while I wouldn't recommend giving up on your gardening gloves and picking up a microphone just yet, there's no harm in having a little chat with your plants now and then. Who knows? You might just find that a bit of friendly conversation, along with some good old-fashioned TLC, is all your garden needs to truly flourish. After all, gardening is all about connecting with nature, and if that includes a bit of friendly banter with your begonias, well, who am I to judge? Just remember, a good gardener knows that listening to your plants is just as important as talking to them. Pay attention to their needs, and they'll reward you with a bounty of blooms, fruits, and vegetables. Now, let's talk about pesticides, shall we? Those little helpers we sometimes turn to when pesky critters threaten to overrun our gardens. There's a common misconception that anything labelled organic is as safe as a vicar's slippers. But just like a soggy bottom on a pie, things aren't always as they seem. Now, I'm not saying all organic pesticides are bad. In fact, many of them can be quite effective and are certainly a better alternative to harsh chemical sprays. But it's important to remember that even organic pesticides can have unintended consequences. Some can harm beneficial insects like ladybugs and bees, which are essential for a healthy garden. And just like with conventional pesticides, overusing organic ones can lead to a buildup of toxins in the soil, which is something we want to avoid at all costs. It's all about finding a balance, isn't it? We want to protect our plants from pests, but we also want to protect the delicate ecosystem of our gardens. So, what's a gardener to do? Well, as with most things in life, a little common sense goes a long way. Before reaching for any pesticide, organic or otherwise, try to identify the source of the problem. Often, a simple solution like introducing beneficial insects or using companion planting can keep pests at bay without the need for any sprays at all. And if you do need to use a pesticide, always choose the least toxic option and follow the instructions on the label to the letter. Remember, a healthy garden is all about working with nature, not against it. Well, there you have it. We've debunked some common gardening myths and hopefully learned a thing or two along the way. Which myth surprised you the most? Do let us know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe to Buckeye Bloomstead for more myth-busting gardening tips. And if you've heard of any other gardening tales that sound a bit too good to be true, do share them in the comments, and we might just feature them in our next video. Remember, gardening should be a joy, not a chore. So, put on your gardening boots, grab your trowel, and get out there and enjoy the sunshine. And as always, happy gardening from all of us at Buckeye Bloomstead. Don't forget to check out our video on 15 garden hacks for thriving gardens for even more great ways to create a successful garden year-round. Subscribe for more gardening tips and DIYs.